Hi everyone, my name's Garth Gilmour and I'll be using Kotlin to create Kotlin, to teach Kotlin in space. So I would be presenting with my colleague Amy, but sadly she's had last minute technical issues, so she'll be with us for the fireside chat, but she's unable to attend at the moment. So just to say right at the beginning, this is a fusion talk, okay? So we're going to be tying a lot of different strands together. So a lot of talks, they have one big thing, and the entire talk is about one big new thing. The goal of this talk is to bring together a lot of different strands. And some of these strands you may be familiar with, you'll have heard about them before, but hopefully you've never seen them combined in this particular way. So these are the different things that we're going to be bringing together. So, my name's Garth Gilmour. I work for a company called Instil. Most of what Instil does is software development. So we started out building web applications, then mobile applications, then cloud applications. These days we do various other interesting things as well, but that's the majority of the business. But we also do training and consultancy, and I run that part of the business. So as I say, my name's Garth Gilmour. These are my contact details here. I was a full-time software developer for about 6 or 7 years, and then the opportunity came up to give this a go, and that was about 20 years ago. So back of an envelope, I've done over 1,000 different meetups and conferences and training events and that kind of thing, and I've taught just about every major technology and language that's come along during that time. And Amy helped me write all the code that you're about to see. She's one of our senior software developers, been with us for about 8 years now. And as I say, sadly, she had last minute technical difficulties. So she was unable to attend, but she'll be with us for the fireside chat. And this is the whole company. Believe it or not, this is the least embarrassing company photo that we could find. And you'll notice that myself and Amy are nowhere to be found. That's an interesting coincidence, that. Yep. And these are some of the clients that we've worked for. So this is a nice shot of the office, and normally whenever I show these photos, I would say it's a lot more untidy at the moment, and it's incredibly busy and it's a hive of activity. But as you know, we're in the middle of a global pandemic. So sadly, this is what the office looks like at the moment. And a lot of people have a lot more serious problems at the moment, but purely from the perspective of somebody running a training company, the classroom is closed, and that caused us a certain amount of pain and anxiety, because whenever you've built a business for 20 years around being able to do really good in-classroom training courses, the fact that you can't actually go into the classroom, well, that causes a certain amount of anxiety, to put it mildly. So in the training team at Instil, we went through a little bit of a crisis. We said, what are we going to do? We're known for delivering really good classroom-based training. How can you deliver really great classroom-based training when the classroom isn't there anymore? So we knew that what we had to do was go out and take our show on the road. So we had to go out and take our training virtual. So we all sat down and put our heads together, and we said, look, how can we square this circle? How can we take our show on the road and deliver the same experience that we're known for in the classroom over the internet? So we came up with a three-pronged approach, and these are the 3 prongs here. So the first prong was multiple instructors. So we said, okay, at any given time, you're going to have 2 channels of communication. So there will be 2 trainers, and one trainer will be doing what I'm doing now. They'll be doing most of the instruction and live coding and that kind of thing. And then there'll be another trainer working in the background as the coach, and they'll mostly be working on chats and messaging and that kind of thing. And they'll be providing background support. So at all times, there'll be 2 levels of communication that are available to you. And then we said, we're going to take the material and we're going to chop it up into even smaller chunks. So it used to be that we would divide the material into 60-minute blocks. At the moment, we try to get it down to 30 or even 20-minute blocks. And we combine all the exercises with breaks and lunch and so on. So the idea is to make everything as disconnected as possible. And then it's the final prong of the three-prong approach that this talk is really about. So we said, look, as developers, we have the technology to do this, okay? So all of the people attending our courses, well, they'll already understand video conferencing, messaging, they'll know how to build collaborative content, they'll understand distributed versioning through things like Git. We can do this, we have the technology. And what we can do is we can build a fast feedback loop where somebody can write some code, submit that code, even if it's got bugs, even if it's got errors or anti-patterns or yellow flags or whatever, but they can submit that code and we can look at it and review it and provide coaching and help them and get them through whatever issues they might happen to have. But the big problem, of course, is that you can't turn around to a client and say, okay, for the duration of this 3-day course, we want to go out and install these 8 tools or these 10 tools or whatever into your environment. That isn't going to fly. So what we needed a tool that combined all of these together. So there are these things called learning management systems or LMSs, and they're very good, they're very impressive. So we went out and had a look at them, but either they did far too much or they did far too little, or the big problem, of course, was just that the client wouldn't understand the brand. So we would be going to a client and saying, here's this LMS tool that you're not familiar with. Please let everybody log in and use this and so on. So that probably wasn't going to fly. But fortunately, we were already a JetBrains training partner. So we've been a JetBrains training partner for several years now. We wrote a classroom-based Kotlin training course that's received a lot of good feedback. We've delivered Kotlin training all around the world and so on. So we were already good friends with JetBrains, and we'd been running a workshop at Kotlin Conf, and we'd seen the launch of Space. So Space was already referred to earlier in the keynote. If you haven't had a look at Space, it's worth your time. So Space tries to give you an all-in-one environment for doing distributed software development. So it gives you one environment where you can do blogs, you can have projects containing repos, you can manage your teams, all this kind of thing. So the idea is that each user gets a profile, and then profiles go inside teams, and teams work on projects, and projects contain repos. So those are the main entities. And then also you can create chats, so you can just chat to people the same way that you would in Slack, or you can create a chat based around a code review, and you can log issues with your code and other people's code. You can create checklists for doing deployments and so on. You can schedule calendars, meetings, or you can schedule meetings into calendars even. You can note absences, you can have to-do lists, all these kinds of things. So here's a little screenshot of the Space environment here. And as you can see down the left, we have the icons for blogs, for projects, for profiles, and so on. And there's a little example here of a project with a Git repo, and you can see all the branches and all the commits that people have made. And then you can drill in and you can see the files within a particular branch. And as you can see on the right-hand side there, you can see the code itself and the new stuff, the changes that have been made as part of this commit. And then you can kick off code reviews, and you can make comments within the code itself, and those comments get pushed up into chats, and you can get quite a good discussion going. So it's very, very nice for doing collaborative coding. So we had a look at Space and we said, look, this is exactly what we need. But the problem was that at the moment, we're only doing about 2 training courses per week. And it takes about 30 minutes to set up a Space instance once you know what you're doing. And that's not so bad. But we said, right, whenever we go back to full strength, well, then we're going to be doing 5 or 6 deliveries per week. And that's an awful lot of setup for Space instances. But fortunately, Space comes with its own HTTP-based API. So what you can do is you can go to a Space instance and you can log in through OAuth, and there are various endpoints that you can send messages to. And as you can see here, what they let you do is they let you do things like create a project or list all the projects or create blogs, view profiles, all this kind of thing. So Space comes with a very nice HTTP API playground, and in there you can build sample requests and send them, and you don't have to worry about OAuth. You don't have to worry about the overhead of logging in or anything like that. It's all taken care of for you. So that's particularly nice. So we said, okay, if this works, we're doing it. So if this works well, then we're definitely going for Space, because then in the future we can automate all the setup. So whenever we're back to full strength and we're doing 5 or 6 deliveries a week, then we can automatically create an instance of Space for every delivery that we do. So the automation bit of Space, that was really important to us. And we're a Spring-based company, or rather, whenever we do anything in Java or Kotlin, we instinctively reach for Space. Sorry, for Spring. So we've been using Spring for a very, very, very long time. So we're extremely familiar with how it works. And these days, of course, there are many different alternatives to Spring and other languages and so on, but it's still the thing that we reach for by default. Okay. So you see here, this is the Spring initializer. If you're not familiar with this, this is start.spring.io. So you put in some values here and it generates a sample project for us. So our automation engine for Space is what we call Maurice, for reasons that only I find funny. So we won't go into it. But we decided to call it Maurice. And this is the actual setup of Maurice. So we have a Gradle-based project, and we're using Kotlin. And there are 3 different dependencies. So we need to have reactive web, we need to have Spring security, and we're using the OAuth client. So one of the reasons that we went for Spring and Spring Web Flux in particular, the reactive web framework, is that it would give us full access to Spring security, and it would give us the ability to log in through OAuth. So Spring would be able to handle the little OAuth dance for us. So if you're going to be doing OAuth in Spring, these are the settings that you need. So in the main application.properties configuration file, you put in this information here. So if you're familiar with the basics of OAuth, these are the magic numbers that you need to put in. So the way that you do it is you have the identifier here, and then you give a name for this connection. So it's yaka 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 dot special name. Okay, so here the special name is just .foo. So this is the OAuth stuff that we're going to need, and Spring will then manage the whole OAuth dance for us, and that's really nice. And if you look down the bottom, there's actually a shortcut. So if you have an admin account within Space, what you can do is you can generate a token, and you can give that token to a client application, and then it can then access Space as if it was you, with your credentials. So by design, a separate application that's logged in through OAuth, it's restricted on what it's allowed to do. Simply because they're being very cautious, which is probably a good thing. So there are certain things that we needed to create that we couldn't create through a regular client credentials login through OAuth. So we use an admin token to do that. So this is how you would go out and create a web client, as it's called inside Spring Web Flux. So this is the thing that will let us send the request to the server. And this is us getting Spring security here to do the little OAuth dance. So this is how it will log in for us. And then here's a separate factory method, and this will create a web client based on top of the token. So I'm specifying the authorization header. There is a simpler method for doing that, but I thought this looked nicer for the demo. It makes it more obvious what's going on. So the first application that we created was a little proof of concept, and I have it up and running here. So dead simple. So the way that Spring Boot works, whoops, wrong file. Here we are. So the way that Spring Boot works is that we have our main method, and that just kicks everything off, and it throws us into a command line application. Because actually the biggest problem these days whenever you do demos is picking which UI framework you want to use. Because if you go for Angular, that annoys all the React people. If you go for React, that annoys all the Angular people. If you go for Vue.js, everybody hates you. So we said, look, we'll make it a command line application. function. So we have a factory method here, which builds what's called a command line runner. And this is just an application with a run method, but you can use a Lambda if you're in Kotlin. Very nice. And this is just giving us a standard GUI loop. So we're going out and reading a choice, and then we're going back and fetching a function, and then we're invoking that function and waiting for it to return something. So you see I've got it up and running here. So for example, I can hit number 3, and it'll go out and it'll show us the details of all the current profiles. Okay, so we've got a few test profiles inside here, including Captain Nemo, Dan Dare, I think's in there too, and then we have some real people as well. So we have myself, Amy, who helped me write the code, and Martin. A quick shout out to Martin. Martin is brilliant. He is the developer advocate at JetBrains for Space and gave us a lot of help. So we're very, very grateful to him for continued assistance. So thank you so much. So this here goes out, and it uses the web clients to send requests up to the Space instance. Yeah. So if you're familiar with Web Flux, you'll be familiar with the web client, and this is the standard type of thing that we do. Okay. Of course, what it returns is it returns a reactive stream, which they call a flux. Yeah. So then we have to do some functional code to take the response and convert it into what we need. And for the purpose of a command line GUI, that's just true or false. But at the end of the day, we created this and everything worked just fine. So we were feeling happy with this. We said, okay, we can do the OAuth dance. We can log in. We can view profiles. We can view blogs and projects. Everything's working quite nicely. Let's take it one stage further. So the next stage was to say, what do we need to do whenever we're creating an instance? Yeah. So whenever we're going out and creating an instance of Space, well, we need to create admin accounts for the 3 trainers. Yeah. And then at the minimum, we'll need a welcome blog post containing setup instructions. And then we'll need multiple projects. So we'll have a public project accessible to everybody with a profile, and that will have the examples and exercises. And then we'll have a private project with the solutions, and that we'll make public at the end of the delivery, but it'll start out as private so that only the instructors can see it. And then, of course, we need to create accounts for the students and populate those with to-do lists for the different exercises and so on. So we needed to take our little command line app and go out and extend it. So how were we going to extend it? Well, this is Kotlin. Of course, we went out and we did a DSL. So I appreciate that most people watching this talk will be very familiar with how you can create DSLs in Kotlin. So let me just skip through it at high speed. So you see here, we've got a type called Space Instance and an instance function that creates it. So this instance function creates a Space Instance object, and then it takes a Lambda. So it takes a Lambda with receiver, yeah, a Lambda within which this will refer to the Space Instance. So we can create our Space Instance with a title, and we can apply the Lambda to configure it. So given that type and that factory method, we can go out and write this code here. And then we can go to the Space instance and we can embed factory methods in there. So we've got a factory method to create a profiles object, a projects object, and a blogs object. So if you call projects, for example, it'll create a projects object for you, but then you can pass in a Lambda with receiver, and we'll use that Lambda with receiver to configure the projects object. And then also, yeah, we'll add it as a field of the Space instance, you know. So good use of the helper methods there. So we have a profiles object, and it is factory methods for creating individual profiles, and you get the idea. Basically, it's turtles all the way down. So we have an instance method which builds and returns a Space instance, and that contains a profiles factory method which builds and returns a profiles object, and that has a profile method which builds and returns a profile object, and then that has properties for forename, surname, and email. So as you can see, we can incrementally build up this DSL, you know, one little line at a time. So it's all good. So in the end, we ended up with something like this, and we said, right, this is what we want the admins at Instil to use. So we have an admin team, And one of the things they do is help us set up for courses. So we said, look, now that we've got this, we can show it to them and we can put it in a separate file and so on. And we can coach them so they can go in and edit this file. And for any of our standard deliveries, hopefully all they'll need to do is to go in and add the appropriate profiles. So if there are 10 people on the course, they'll need to add 10 profiles in here. And then they might need to customize the blogs. So you see here, whenever you create a blog, you pass in a URI, and that gives the path to the content for the blog, but we're doing a little bit of overloading. So again, it's a standard bit of Kotlin DSLs that you overload the unary plus operator or the negation operator or something like that. And here we're using that to inject, extra content into the actual blog. So happy days. There was a little bit of refactoring that we needed to do. So of course, in toString and so on, you're constantly going out and looping over your children to build content. So we created some helper methods for that. And then there's a weakness in the way that Kotlin does DSLs, which is that a Lambda with receiver can see receivers in higher scopes. So the practical effect of that within the DSL is that you can put the profiles factory method within the profiles factory method and so on. But as with anything on the JVM, there's a way around it. So you can create an annotation and annotate that with DSL marker, and then you can use that on the types within your DSL, and that will prevent Lambdas with receivers being able to see receivers in nested scopes. So happy days. So we had our DSL up and running, and then we said, okay, so we've got the DSL and we've got the web client configured and running. What we need is a way to bring the two together. Okay, so I apologize. Those of you with a sensitive disposition, you may wish to turn away now. I'm about to show you some UML. Okay, so 3, 2, 1, go. Okay, so we went out and we applied a design pattern. So we went out and applied one of the classic gang of 4 patterns, and that's the visitor pattern. So we said, okay, we're going to create an interface for visitors, and a visitor object will have a visit method for everything in the DSL, and everything in the DSL will implement the visited interface. Yeah, so I can go to my space instance object within the DSL and ask it to accept a visitor. So you see here, here's the space instance type, and here's the accept method. It takes a visitor, it asks the visitor to visit itself, yeah, and then we build a list of the projects, profiles, and blogs, and ask each of those to accept the visitor. So that the visitor object gets passed around the DSL. And the proof of concept for this, which everybody does, of course, is a little print visitor. So you see here, this is going to get passed around the DSL, and all it's going to do is just go out and print things. So having proved that that worked, we said, right, let's link that together with the code that we have in Spring Boot to go out and talk to space. So we created an interface for our space client, and we said, okay, we'll need methods to create profiles, create projects, create blogs, find out all of those things and so on. And then we created an implementation of it. So as you see here in Spring Speak, this is a component. It's the Web Flux space client, and we're going to pass in 2 web clients. One of them which has been authenticated using OAuth, the other one has been authenticated using the security token. And then we can go out and we can implement the methods using that. So then finally, we can have a space creation visitor. So we'll have something that implements our DSL visitor interface and gets injected into it, the Web Flux space client. So this will bring together the Spring Boot world and the DSL world, and this will crawl its way through the DSL and go out and create things for us. So I have a little demo here which Amy was going to run. I'm not going to go out and run it because I'm personally not set up to do it, but I can walk you through the code a little bit. So by the way, all the slides for this talk we'll put up afterwards, and all the code will be available through Bitbucket. So there will be 2 public Bitbucket repos, one for the console-based version of this and one for the DSL-based version of this. So you can have a play with this to your heart's content. So as ever with Spring Boot, it's the application class that kicks everything off. And then inside the application class here, you can see that we've got our DSL where we're going out and creating the things. And then we have a package for the types within the DSL. There we are there. And then we have a package for the visitor infrastructure. And here's our space creation visitor. And then we have a package for the client. So here's the space client interface here. And here's the implementing type. And all going out and doing interesting things using Spring Boot, using the Web Flux API. So this works just fine for us, and this enables us to go out and configure instances of space. So happy days. So what do we think? What conclusions have we reached, and so on? Well, first of all, space is intuitive and works well. We like it very much. It does what it says on the tin. It gives you all the different resources that a modern developer would expect these days to do distributed development, and it's nice. It works well, so we're very happy with it. And then it can be used from Spring 5, and that was a big thing. So I'm sure your experience is a lot like mine. Whenever any vendor comes up and says, oh, and our product has an API, well, you immediately get suspicious. You think, okay, yes, you've got an API, but have you tested it? Or the tests that you've written, were they only written using the framework that you used to create the thing? So in the past, I've seen people who say, we've got an API and we wrote it in Ruby, let's say, fine language, but maybe they only tested it from Ruby, and they only tested it from the same toolkit that they used to write the API in the first place. Yeah. So we were very relieved to see that we can go and do the OAuth dance through Spring 5 and the different endpoints work, and everything's good. Yeah. And then the automation is going to save us an awful lot of time and reduce stress. As I say, at the moment, half an hour to set up a space instance, not so bad. We're not too worried about that. But in the future, that's going to be very onerous. So this automation is going to be very, very useful. What was the downside? Well, Space and its API are still an EAP, and therefore they're still doing EAP things. So they're still moving stuff around, and so you log into it on a Tuesday and things are in a slightly different place than they were on the Monday, and they've been playing around with the APIs, and certain endpoints got deprecated whilst we were developing it, and we had to move to new ones and so on. But that's what you expect to happen during an EAP. So we knew that was going to happen. But I just thought I would have a little whinge in this presentation. The biggest problem was that we went for Web Flux, and nothing wrong with Web Flux, but of course Web Flux is a reactive API, whereas the space HTTP endpoints aren't. And there's no reason why they ever should be. I mean, it's not like you're going to have 100,000 profiles in space that you need to process in real time or something like that. So there's no need for space to open WebSockets and send things down to you the moment it generates them and so on. Yeah. But as an industry, we seem to be charging forward towards a reactive future. So we wanted to join in with that. But there's this horrible reactive divide, where you have a reactive client using a non-reactive endpoint, and you end up doing flat map and flat map many an awful lot and so on. So that's a little bit awkward. But it's now a known problem. We're well aware of how to get around it. So at the end of the day, we're very happy. It all worked out very well, and we're looking forward to using it as we ramp up the business. So just to say, if you go to the discount link for Instil, there's actually a little competition. So we're offering some free training for anybody who sends us the best space plugin. So if you can go out and write a little space plugin, and remember, you've got our code to borrow from, feel free to do that. So you can go out, write a little plugin, put it in a Git repo and send us the details. And we'll be awarding some free training based on the most creative plugin and the highest quality code. So that's about it. Let me just go now and see if there are any questions. No, I'm not seeing any questions. Hopefully I'm looking at the right window. So let me just finish it at that point. So I shall just stop sharing my screen. Cool. And say thank you very much indeed for your attention. And I hope that was useful.